guitar like I'm on my tiptoes, baby. You think a little too small. I got big goals, baby. Hey, where the money at? Look,
What's going on, everybody? It's a free agency primer here on the Jacked Ramsay podcast. I have got Jake Fischer from Bleacher Report, but more importantly, he also has a new book out, Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Available wherever books are sold. Jake, we are at 11:49, 10 minutes before tip-off here for free agency for you on the East Coast, and everybody's kind of wondering grand scheme what's going to happen in the NBA, but here in Portland, we're focused on really one name and one name only, and let all the dominoes fall where they may. And that one name is a young, unrestricted free agent in Norman Powell. What are you hearing going into free agency into day one? Are we expected to hear from Norm and his camp earlier? They're going to ride this out 3-year, 4-year, back in Portland, not here. What's the overall feel so far?
Yeah, I think the numbers that I've heard around Norm right now are definitely a 3-year structure, something between 3 years between 50 and 60. That's the word on the street. You do hear that Detroit it's kind of waiting in the wings to make an offer if Portland and Norm don't come to terms here. I think New Orleans is also a potential suitor as well. And yeah, Norm Powell is clearly an important factor in this offseason, being that he is the number one chip that Portland has to bring back in order to continue building a roster around Damian Lillard that could obviously have some more firepower and be competitive in the Western Conference next season. So yes, I think that's a very important situation to keep an eye on.
That's the first domino that really needs to fall. Is this something that you expect to be kind of announced early, or do you think that Norm maybe tries to, in his camp, try to see the best available option and just kind of maybe get the full free agency experience?
I think the full free agency experience is certainly possible here, especially that it's been communicated to me that Powell is a player who views himself as a second or third option on the team. And in Portland, that really wasn't the case, right? He kind of shifted towards being a fourth or fifth option sometimes offensively. So maybe that's an opportunity that presents itself in Detroit or in New Orleans or something like that, or a sneaky team like New York. I mean, Tom Thibodeau was long, mentioned as someone who loved Norm Powell at the trade deadline, right? So I think it's certainly. I mean, Norm Powell also, had 12 teams that were calling about him back at the deadline, right? So
it was a busy deadline for Norman Powell. There's no doubt about that.
Exactly. So that would seem to indicate, a long list of people also willing to give him money right now. So you're right. It's going to be complicated.
When you're looking at this, does the current addition of CJ McCollum being on the roster, is that a hurdle that the Blazers can realistically overcome and run it back with Dame, CJ, and Norm all in the lineup together for the season?
I think it definitely does work. I mean, when it was communicated to me that when Portland made that trade, they viewed Norm as someone who could guard threes in a lineup with Dame and CJ on the floor, and they were hoping that he would and do it well and do it for a long time. And it definitely seems to be their goal. But everyone's got a number that at a certain point their team will not match.
Yeah.
And even if they are unrestricted, I mean, we look at Lonzo with New Orleans right now in Chicago. I mean, the Norm Powell situation is very similar. I think, Duncan Robinson with Miami could be a similar case. So it's not a situation that's unique to Norman Powell in Portland. So I mean, that just goes to show that it's a situation that a lot of teams and players are facing, and it's possible it could go either way.
Okay, so that's obviously the big domino that's going to fall for Portland. But they don't have Zach Collins. They don't even have the option to match him because they didn't opt to pick his option because he's been injured. Their current depth right now is Dame, CJ, Covington, Nurkic, Simons, Little, Ellaby, and Derek Jones Jr. That is the current under contract crop of players the Portland Trail Blazers currently have. The hope is to bring Norman Powell back, but beyond that, they still have additional legwork to do. What are you hearing as far as Portland is concerned, as far as front court options? Obviously, there's guys like Bobby Portis who sound like they're returning back to Milwaukee. Nerlens Noel may go out. New York may be interested in keeping him. Is there anybody front court-wise that you're hearing linked to Portland that we'll either hear early, or is Portland going to have to wait for everybody else to kind of figure out where they're going to end up and then hope to swoop in?
Yeah, the big man market is pretty centered on Toronto, Dallas, San Antonio, and New York right now. I have not heard Portland really there at all. The one thing I've heard about Portland in terms of the non-backcourt guys is Derek Jones seems to be available via trade. I don't want to say that, too loudly. I've only heard it a little bit. I don't think he's actively being shopped by any stretch, but obviously that situation didn't work out great this year. I don't think it was, but I think everyone involved would admit that was not a perfect marriage. And maybe Derek was a little bit overqualified to be, a starter on a team that's got real, aspirations to go deep in the playoffs. So I think it only makes sense that his name would be open to exploratory talks for sure.
When you're talking about guys that are looking for the MLE, like an Otto Porter Jr., that market may have softened up for them. How many guys do you expect that were looking at MLE or TP MLE money to kind of go down a few brackets just because of the way the market's materializing?
It's certainly possible. I think this year more than ever, it seems like the market is going to really be, a domino effect type situation. Once Kyle Lowry moves off the board, the point guards are going to be the ones that fly first. So it's the Lonzo, Lowry, Dennis Schroder, Spencer Dinwiddie dynamic. Alex Caruso seems to be like he'll fit into that mold as well. And then, the big market, I think, takes place after that. And then I think the wing market moves on. I think that's kind of the cycle we're going to be seeing here. So, for the Otto Porters, for the other mid-level type guys, I think these bigger dominoes have to fall first. And I think the teams with all the cap, New York, San Antonio in particular, those two teams, like they're going to, and Oklahoma City as well, like they're going to be sitting, I think, sifting through the rubble at the end of the beginning of the madness, being that those teams seem right now to be linked as secondary choices to other teams. The only player I've heard in that top tier, let's say the top couple tiers, that has their sights set on New York and wants to play in New York right now is Kelly Oubre. And outside of that, I think with San Antonio and Dallas and other situations, it's just too close to call right now. And the Kyle Lowry, Miami, situation seems to be the one that's moved to the forefront of the league, and we'll kind of go from there.
When you're looking at, obviously, the top level, Portland hasn't been able to attract those guys ever, so that's kind of pushed to the side already. Are there any guys that you're hearing, front court, back court, otherwise, that Portland is at least on the list, the secondary or third considerations when you're talking about wing or backcourt players?
I'm sorry that I really haven't heard much.
Listen, I need you to say that too, because I've heard the same thing.
That could be good, that could be bad, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of teams that like to do their business clandestinely, and
which Neil does.
Which Neil likes to do, and maybe they've got some ducks in a row and chickens lined up and they're ready to hatch all those metaphors. But no, I have not heard that. Even guys like Kelly Olynyk and Daniel Tice and Larry Markin, I haven't heard anybody linked to Portland at all. It's been Detroit and Houston and San Antonio and Dallas and stuff like that. So no, I haven't heard Portland come up at all outside of the Norman Powell situation, outside of a little bit of Derek Jones stuff that came up today, and everyone waiting for Damian Lillard to potentially come back and see this roster and wonder what he'll decide to do.
And that's kind of, I think we'll kind of steer towards the big piece here, non-Damian Lillard wise, is CJ McCollum. I had heard, discussions were had, very topical levels, but nothing ever went anywhere. If the Blazers are going to move off CJ McCollum, when do you think that happens? For me, I'll give you mine. I think it's a late free agency period. We're looking like August 10th, August 12th, after everything else has kind of been settled. Are you in that mindset, or do you think it's already a non-starter and they'll go into the season with him?
I would agree with that. I think the same timeline with Ben Simmons, and that's not to say they'll be traded for each other, but I think trades can happen at all times, right? Once the league calendar is flipped, free agency is flying right in the moment, and I think that recency bias, that that timeliness is something that teams are going to be focused on that market pretty quickly here. And once the dust kind of settles a bit, and maybe one team didn't get their guy, or someone takes a surprise offer from a team that wasn't expecting to, then I think maybe those trade scenarios pop up. I wrote about that Pascal Siakam, CJ McCollum framework that's been discussed, but I was told it didn't go very far. That's the only real thing I've heard with CJ, and it was that, and what I heard was, again, that it didn't go very far. So I think that might be an indication, yes, that CJ could be there for a bit here, but also I think it's going to take the perfect deal to move him. As much as the pressure is now on, of course, to find a better roster to supplement Dame. There's obviously so much history there, and Neil O'Shea is said to really have a soft spot and a fondness for his backcourt pairing. And, Dame, I think, has been loyal to CJ throughout all of this. So you're right. If it's going to happen, I think it would be later on in the summer and more of a surprise, maybe like not a last second type move, but you know what I mean? Something that is kind of an adjustment.
Heading into camp, it wouldn't be out of, or I should say heading into Summer League, it wouldn't be obscene to all of a sudden hear about a deal day 2, day 3 of Summer League.
Would agree, especially when, front offices convene and guys.
Everybody's in Vegas together, and yeah, that's kind of where
our flow and conversations start happening.
All right, I'm going to get you out of here on this. I want you to call a little bit of a shot. Who's the guy who ends up surprising everybody with the amount of money that they get on the high end?
I mean, I think people will be surprised how much Tim Hardaway gets. I do. I think he's someone that's going to have a pretty robust market. And it could push close to $20 million, which I don't think a lot of people really would have expected, at a certain point. But he had a hell of a year last year. He's got a lot of teams with interest, so I think that's the one.
Who's the guy on the flip side of this who everybody's thinking is going to sign real quick and maybe is still there day 5, day 6, day 7, and ends up taking less money?
Well, Dennis Schroder, wanted that 484 number, or wanted more than that. And
somebody's going to get an agent fired.
Yeah, and now, I heard the Knicks were prepared to offer someone 100 over 4 a couple weeks back, but, then, now it sounds like maybe the Knicks will probably be offering more of like a 40 over 2 type deal. I don't think Dennis Schroder is going to come close to that 84 million that he turned down, and that's going to be a big loss, obviously.
All right. That's mildly depressing for that camp. Even more depressing for Blazers fans. I wanted to have you come on here and basically share a lot of the same things. You're obviously more plugged in than I am, but it's the Blazers operate in silence, but it's been Red October silence. I haven't
been really, really quiet about Portland. I would agree.
So it was one of those things where like, all right, let's get a little bit of primer as we head into this. So thank you for hopping on, man. I truly appreciate you. Go ahead and plug your book and anything you got going at Bleacher Report.
Yeah, I wish I had more for you, but there's definitely more. There's definitely more in the book. Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. I talked to over 300 people for it. There's some Portland stuff. There's some bit about the process to drafting CJ that's in there. And I have some quotes from Dame and CJ about tanking that people might be interested in. And that's really about it. I mean, I've got a ton of new details and stories and transactional rumors in the book that you're not going to find anywhere else. So please buy a copy. I'd greatly appreciate it.
All right, thank you, man, for hopping on. I appreciate you guys for this free agency primer here on the inaugural weekend for the Jacked Ramsay podcast, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network, guys. Like, rate, review, subscribe. Remember, it's a new podcast, brand new feed. Sprague and I will have you covered each and every day throughout the season. Make sure you subscribe to the feed, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Because I head tired like I'm on my tiptoes, baby. You think a little too small.